Housing Decision Meeting. I'm Councillor Darren Sanders, Cabinet Member for Housing. Before we begin, I need just to run through a few safety pieces of information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the fire marshal regulations of the Guildhall Trust, in whose building we're in, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should remember to sign out when leaving the building after today's meeting. There is also live web streaming. Good afternoon, Wayne. May I draw everyone's attention to this fact, and also that the meeting is being filmed from a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room, and the recording will be on the Council's website for you to view on demand. The camera will mainly capture the backs of anyone making deputations, but there will be some footage of them as they approach and leave the table where the microphones are located, and of people entering or leaving the room whilst the meeting is in progress. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone remember to use the microphones provided when they are speaking. So, if I may, I will start with, just for the massed hordes who are watching live or even on demand. I'll just go through some introductions starting on my right.
Joanne Wildsmith, Democratic Services.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Meredith Hughes, Assistant Director for Buildings.
Steve Groves, Head of Building Maintenance.
Sharon George, Interim Head of Housing Needs Advice and Support.
Sarah Wiltshire, Rough Sleeper Coordinator.
Alison Cloutman, Housing Business Partner.
Jo Bennett, Head of Business Growth, Relationships and Support.
Paul Fielding, Assistant Director Housing.
Wayne Leighton, Finance Manager.
Mada Abrams, CLG Member and a volunteer. Thank you.
Maria Cole, Residents Consortium.
Cal Corkery, Councillor for Charles Dickens Ward and Labour Spokesperson for Housing.
Councillor Scott Plater Harris, the Opposition Spokesperson for Housing from the Conservative Group.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we also have one actual normal human at the back. Hello and welcome. This room is highly impersonal, I know. Feel free, if you have any points or whatever, to come and sit at the main table with everyone else. Don't feel that the expensive seats are where you should be. Okay? Feel free. And may I have your name, madam, please? Maureen. You in particular here for anything at all, Maureen? Okay, that's absolutely fine. We'll come to that in a second, and thank you for that, Maureen, and thank you for taking the time to come in out of the rain to come and join us. Does anybody have any apologies? I have one sort of apology. No? Okay. This morning, I learnt of the death of someone who should be here. His name is Pete. He lives in Ivy Close. And he has been a staunch supporter of the Residents Consortium for several years. I was informed of this by his other half at about 9:30 as I went past his flat this morning. The ambulance was still there when I passed, so I realised this will be a bit of a shock for many, many people. But Pete was a good source of common sense. Hello. A good source of common sense, I know, to the Residents Consortium, Maria, and at these meetings, and to me as well. I'm sorry, I know that's a bit of a shock, but this is really the only place I can put it, and I'm sorry to hear that. I have no idea what to do, but I will pass that on, but I know that will be a shock and surprise to many, many people. And apologies, Maria, for doing it to you this way, but I just didn't see you before today. Yes. You weren't alone. It's not what I expect on my, or I have to say it's not the sort of thing I expect on my walk into work. But I'm sure all our thoughts are with his friends and with his family, of which there are many, many hundreds. Genuine apologies for that, but that's the only place I could put it. Does anybody have any declarations of interest at all? Maria?
Under agenda item 5, I live in Edgbaston House, and that is a specific name.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for that, Maria. I also have a personal but not prejudicial interest in that my mother lives in a council flat, and so will be subject to some of the stuff that is in this budget. That it is not a factor in my decision making. Okay, so we have our declarations of interest. The next item, I believe, is the item on rough sleeping, and I'll explain briefly why I've asked for this to come here. And that's because there's a huge amount of work that is going on around homelessness and rough sleeping in the city. But we've had people ask, well, what is the council doing? As if it's not doing anything. We know there's fantastic work going on by the many, many voluntary groups in our city who are absolutely amazing and sensational. But it's also been about a year or so since the rough sleeper strategy was agreed, and I think it's quite useful for us to have an update on where we are. So that's my rationale for this being here. Sarah, do you wish to talk us through it? And thank you for coming.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. So this is an information-only report which summarises the resources that's available to rough sleepers in the city. It is a challenging area, and there are many reasons why people are rough sleeping. There's a population which is constantly changing, and there's a number of factors which provide challenges for those individuals in actually moving away from rough sleeping themselves. The services that we are provided for rough sleepers are actually non-statutory services, so they're provided in addition to the duties that as a City Council we owe to homeless people and to the staff that work at Housing Needs and Advice and Support, although they do also work with the rough sleepers to make assessments of their situations and provide personalised housing plans and work with them to try and resolve their homelessness. But in terms of the non-statutory services, we've got 57 night beds now. 45 are funded by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and 12 by Portsmouth City Council, which provide a place of safety for rough sleepers in the city. And over the last year, 372 individuals have accessed those night beds, so it gives you some idea of the scale of the number of rough sleepers and that are able to utilise that service. We've also got a day service which works in conjunction with that night bed service and provides support in the day. And over the winter months we've had an extension of that service until 8 in the evening. So that's provided an evening support to the rough sleepers and also a hot meal. We're getting on average about 32 individuals per evening who are using that service, so that has been well utilised. We've also got some health services which are funded for a year through Public Health England, providing mental health, psychology and GP support and a modern matron to bring health services to the people that use the day services and the hostel nearby at Hope House. We've got some intensive work being carried out through our navigators team, which are working flexibly with some of the longer term night bed users and rough sleepers, engaging with those more complex individuals. They have managed to house 8 people to date, which is really helpful, but also it's about building up relationships with that group who are quite complex and difficult to engage with. We've got our outreach team that work in conjunction with the Community Warden Service to outreach to rough sleepers who are actually on the street and try and bring them into a housing pathway. You've already mentioned the voluntary sector, and they do a really good job. They provided a number of night beds, additional night beds this winter through Open Church, and they also provide meals, food and support around the city. And lastly but not leastly, we've got some work going on in some slightly more unusual areas. We've got some work going on at QA Hospital that we've funded through the Cold Weather Fund, through the Ministry of Housing, to engage with people who are at risk of homelessness on hospital discharge. and we've got a worker working in the libraries at the moment to engage with Rough Sleepers when they use those services within the city. So really that's just a summary of the work that's going on to try and support the Rough Sleepers in Portsmouth.
That's very kind, Sarah. Thank you very much indeed. This is primarily for Maureen's benefit. Essentially what we do from here is that we then ask people if they've got any questions or any comments, and then I sort of sum up at the end. Okay? Later on in the meeting I'll take decisions, but this isn't a decision item. This is more sort of an information so more people know. Are there any particular issues you have, Maureen?
One of the things I was thinking about was money.
Okay.
Because these people might not have money. Are they charged in these services, day services or night services, for laundry, for food, anything like that, when they go in? Because they might not have any money, or how do they access
Okay.
for the housing costs?
I can come back to the second bit of that because there is stuff that is being worked on. Sarah, do you want to talk about the first bit?
So the services provided in the night beds and the day services are all free of charge to people, so they can access those services. Okay. So funding, yes, either from the Ministry of Housing, and some of the night beds are funded by Portsmouth City Council.
Yeah. And you're right, one of the things we want to try and do is that there's lots of people who've got common humanity and common decency, and so they give money to people they see on the street, and that's great. But very often that's not what we're told to do. So one of the things that we're looking at is to see if we can find ways of something called alternative giving. So we're working with a Portsmouth-based provider who has access to various restaurants and stuff like that, who can offer effectively a meal ticket. And we want to try and bring that in over the summer. And the officers are currently working with the provider, who's presented to a group that oversees the rough sleeping approach in the city, which includes all the voluntary agencies, the statutory agencies, and various political parties as well. And they were very excited about what's on offer, and hopefully we can talk about that more probably towards the end of May. I think that's right, Sharon and Sarah. But the key thing is that, as well as what's going on at what I know as the Arts Lodge in Victoria Park, which is around what's called Pay It Forwards, and that also helps as well. But you're absolutely right. That is an important thing, and that's one of the things we're very keen on. Was there anything else, Maureen?
I'm just thinking that a lot of people are not giving money directly to beggars or homeless people, rough sleepers. What they're doing is they're going to shops like McDonald's, outlets, and buying food. And instead of the money that they do get from DWP, they're spending that maybe where they shouldn't, and that's judgmental. I appreciate that, but that's keeping them on the streets, alcohol dependency and drug dependency. And they don't need to buy food because we're feeding them instead, because we're not giving cash.
I fully understand your truth, and thank you very much for that, Maureen. Is that, from Sharon and Sarah's perspective, is that the evidence you're picking up? Is that what people and organisations are telling you?
I think there's lots of different sources in the city, really, and some people want to give food. There is quite a lot of food available through the voluntary sector. I think different rough sleepers access different sources of support. Some people use the day services more than others, and some people use the other outlets. So I think having a range of alternative giving and meals within voluntary sector and day service provides a range that will enable most people to access, or everyone to access, some sort of support. But I take your point that, yes, we wouldn't advise people to give money. We would try and provide the services that we know people need.
I think that's why the alternative outlets that we're looking at will be of some help. Yeah. Is that all right, Maureen?
Yeah, I agree that a cup of coffee is handy because, it's very cold out there. And I've seen some people in the street very traumatised, even now coming down to here. So, yeah, they do need a hot drink given. But I don't go with feeding all the time because they're not using the money in the right way.
It's about treating people as individuals, I think, and that's one of the important things, and trying to find an outlet, which is why we're going down that route. Maureen, I'm incredibly grateful to you, and thank you for that. CLG Housing Consortium colleagues, any thoughts?
Well, I did not know that
Please press your button, by the way, in the microphone. That's better.
Yeah, I received the invitation, but as soon as I arrived, Maria told me I'm not supposed to be here. Is it? I don't know which is which.
I think of it. I think
feel
it's
so strange.
No. I thank you very much for that. I think we'll raise the process issues after the meeting, if that's okay.
Okay.
But if you have any thoughts on this particular paper, that would be lovely. If you don't, that's also lovely.
About the homelessness, well, I know some, like a business, let's say it's a business, to help these homelessness young boys. If we have like a cafe or a laundrette where they can work as a worker inside the shops, then they will have jobs and then they can earn income and they can be able to afford what they need in their everyday living and especially the rent. So there are so many kinds of ways that they can earn money if we will help them only to find somewhere.
I'll come back to that at the end. I'm very grateful to you for that, but that is something that we have been looking at as part of the Rough Sleeper strategy. Maria?
Yes, on section 12.3, I know that the churches provide help during the winter months, but if we had severe weather conditions at other times of the year, are they then also able to help, or is it just for the winter?
It wouldn't necessarily be the churches, but we do have a plan in place for severe weather, which involves the existing providers, so that in that event there is a place of safety for all rough sleepers who wish to come in out of the cold or whatever severe weather we are facing.
That was your comment. Cal?
Thank you. I just wanted to start, I guess, by echoing your sentiments about the passing of Peter Burton. Peter was a kind of really well-known and respected figure in his community, former resident of Horatia House, was then moved into one of the ground floor properties at Ivy Close, attended the Residents' Consortium meeting with us last Thursday just, kind of trying to speak up for the concerns that he had and other council tenants, and quite often kind of as on his ward councillors would be feeding back issues to me, and was really passionate about the area in which he lived and trying to kind of stand up for people. So yeah, I'm pretty shocked to hear that. It's the first time I'd heard it. So definitely pass on my condolences to the friends and family.
Thank you, Cal.
So just to move on to the report, in terms of section 5.5 and the number of nights that beds were at full capacity, listed as 16%, I was just curious about how confident we are in the accuracy of those figures, firstly.
So we do collect data about the people who use night beds and how many people do not attend. So I am confident we get daily reports on that, that we collate that information.
So just to pick up on that then, if the night beds are fully booked in the morning and then there are people that do not attend, is that listed as full capacity or not full capacity? Because there would have been spaces there but people weren't able to book them.
We would be looking at the number of beds that were actually occupied, but I'm actually looking now to make sure that if we do have people who are unable to book, we identify if they did then later get a bed within that process so that we can have some clearer information about that. But we have now got the additional night beds, which should help with some of those capacity issues.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely think having that information about how many beds are fully booked at that point in the morning is going to be useful, because having spoken to kind of service users and staff working in those services, I understand their impression is that it's a lot more often than 16% of the time, but I appreciate that may change with the increased capacity. Just to pick up on something that I've raised a number of times with regards to the housing first approach to supporting homeless people, I'm curious as to what our position is on that, whether we think what we're doing is housing first or a form of it, or whether we are doing something different and have chosen not to pursue housing first as a model.
So we haven't actually got a housing first model. We have looked at some alternative solutions for people. So on a small scale, we have looked at that and provided some accommodation where we've house people off the streets and then work with them creatively. So in effect that is accommodation first really. I think it's one of those things that's not right for everyone, it is right for some people, and we try and take an individual approach to each person really. Some people need that more structured support around them that a hostel will provide.
Okay. Scott?
Thank you, Darren. Just go to 5.7 in the report. I'm just going to point that Maria raised about adverse weather. Obviously, when there is adverse weather, we have the severe weather emergency protocol, which is implemented. Can you tell me in the last year how many times that's been implemented?
Since we've been looking this winter, we've three times. It was once during the initial cold weather that we had earlier on, and then we had the 2 sets of storms. So, yeah.
So 3 times basically in the last winter.
Yes, this cold period. Yeah.
I just mention it because we've had some really adverse weather recently with excessive rain, and it doesn't seem to be cold, but there are great numbers of areas which do flood.
Yeah.
It just does worry me that obviously are we not implementing this because we haven't hit a threshold where actually the weather itself is quite poor at the moment?
We've actually deliberately written that so that it's broader than the national guidelines, which is about
Good.
the temperatures falling below freezing, and the storms were the 2 occasions because we had severe wind and rain that we did implement SWAP.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. If you go to 6.2 in the report, it says 83 unique individuals used the service and were provided a meal, and on average we had 32, which I know you stated earlier. Out of those 83, how do we track those individuals?
So the Home and Stay Service do track who's using the service.
But how do we do it? Do we keep obviously tabs when they come back? Are we working on their frequencies? Have some of them been refused or gone away? I just want to get a picture of how it works.
So they would look at the number of individuals that came each night, and they would check each night overall, so they could see within that month how many unique individuals there were.
And is this engaging as well with our housing service at the same time to ensure that these people are going through the process, and how many have gone from that process to being housed?
I haven't got figures about how many have been housed. They will be engaging during the day as well. So it's a sort of continuation really throughout the day, and it runs through the evening. So as a result of that evening service, I wouldn't have a separate figure for that.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, if possible, would we be able to have those figures? Would they be made available, if that would be all right? Just that it gives us an idea of how, from start to actually the process to actually the end of the process, so we can actually see how many people are being housed through this mechanism. Yeah. That'd be perfect. If we go to 10.1, which is, let me just grab it myself, which is the preventing homelessness following hospital discharge. We got a grant of £25,000 for short-term service piloting preventing homelessness following hospital discharge. How many people have actually used that service?
24 people have used
24 people have used the service. So it's basically about £1,000 a time, which is actually quite good value for money for someone that's coming out of hospital, really. Okay, brilliant. It's just it's a real good point, because that's something that what I would call people don't see. You know, people come out of hospital and they expect to go home, but that's a really good service. Also, on that point, how many people have refused the use of the service once they leave hospital?
There have been a couple of refusals, and I haven't got those exact figures with me, I'm afraid.
That's fine. And through the chair, we can have
Yes,
those
yes,
as well.
yeah.
Perfect. Sorry if I'm killing you by data. I just enjoyed to see the nitty-gritty of it. And I'm going to go finish on 13.1, if I may, Chair.
Of course you can.
Which is really congratulations for the award of £650,000, which I think is great, and it's really quite pleasing to see that even though there's been a change of administration on the issues of homelessness, you are following through with the work that was started probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it's really important to see it's still going that way, and there's more to do. So, well done.
Thank you very much, Scott. Well, that saves me doing half the thank yous, exactly, thank you very much. I wanted to start by thanking people who aren't me, which is quite rare. I would, firstly, just following on from Scott's point, I'd like to thank my predecessor, Paul Gaudier, whose work and enthusiasm and commitment led to the creation of the day and the night service. And I think one of the things that we, as Liberal Democrats, are now doing is building on that by actually looking at the longer term issues as well that face us, and also responding to issues that come up. from time to time. And I think it's interesting because Sarah said earlier on that this is a non-statutory service. In English, that means we have no legal duty to help any rough sleeper at all. Now, I regard that as nuts, and I regard that as immoral. And I think, and that's why we do create a lot of help to try and help people. And one of the things I would like to see is that this does become a legal duty, just as it becomes a legal duty if you get kicked out by a landlord or get kicked out by your friends and family, so that we can actually ensure that we have a proper and statutory footing on which to assist. And as a result of it being a non-statutory duty, we've had to rely a lot on government money. And Scott is right, since my party resumed power in May 2018, we've had more than £2 million of government money, for which we're eternally grateful, as well as some imaginative ways of using council money as well. So, for instance, we've doubled the number of wardens, partly because we wanted to look and see, to try and help people who were sleeping rough in the staircases in tower blocks in Buckland and in various other places across the city. That's the right way forwards. And I think one of the things we've got to do, building on Paul Gaudier's work, is to be more integrated and more long-term. Coming back to Cal's point about housing first, from my reading, different people have different ideas of what that means. Whether in Brighton it's purely for people who have complex mental health issues. Some parts of the world, it's essentially what we do, which is to offer a mixture of housing and support. In other parts of the world, it's more, I know you're very keen on, which is put people in a home first and then worry about putting the support together later. We at the moment operate, without calling it that, something that is very similar to some of the models of housing first anyway, but crucially treating people as an individual, I think, is absolutely crucial, and treating people as a human first with needs first. Everybody's an individual, as we all know, and everybody has individual needs. And I think that way forwards is very, very suitable. And that's why I think the navigators, which we brought in with the last tranche of government money, is hugely helpful. And the fact people are being housed who were sleeping rough is very, very good news. And they've got to be put in the right sort of accommodation. Sometimes they'll need support, sometimes they won't. But it's about treating people as humans that's important. I'm also delighted with the work that's happened over the last few months. Having a hot meal, having longer opening hours at U House has helped massively. I found it surprising that we were being told there wasn't a hot meal at U House in the evenings. There now is. We now want to try and make sure that that continues. Extra opening hours has also helped greatly, particularly in terms of ensuring there's community cohesion in the area around it as well. But there's a lot more work to do. As Scott has said, there's a lot more work with the hidden homeless as well. So things like hospital discharge, things about people being released from prison, things about people who survived domestic abuse is something that Sharon and Sarah have been working on. It's been working on, I know, with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner as well, who've been very welcoming, and I'm hopeful that they will continue to be welcoming after May. I'd also like to thank the Homeless Working Group, which has an officially very, very long title, but that's what it is, who've been hugely helpful. This is an issue, as Scott has said, that transcends party politics, and I'm delighted that people from all walks of life have been able to contribute to that. And I'd also like to thank the chairwoman, Sally Taylor, for putting up with us all. So on that basis, I'm happy to note that report. And if, Maureen, you have any further questions or comments about it, not right now, but at any stage, please feel free. And I would welcome any comments from our voluntary sector partners as well. We want to try and make sure we can carry the service forwards over the next 5 to 10 years. So thank you for that discussion, Sharon and Sarah. You can now go home in the rain, or leave in the rain if you wish. You can also stay if you wish, but that's entirely up to you. It's still a free country. Right, we move to the development of affordable homes at Huntsman Close in Hart Plain in Havant. Now, this is in James's name, but are you going to delegate this to another human? Indeed. Joe, excellent. I saw you wriggling in your chair earlier, so I hope the chairs in the Guildhall are improving.
I think they are. It's my age. I apologise. So to come to the development of affordable homes in Huntsman Close and Havant, we're looking to seek approval from yourself for to instruct our strategic development team to deliver a new development of 10 flats. The 10 flats will be let through not only the Portsmouth City Council waiting list but also the Havant Borough Council waiting list. This development is looking for a capital expenditure of £1.9 million to deliver these homes, and it's a housing revenue account development. We're also looking to delegate authority to the Director, in consultation with the Director of Finance and Resources, to amend the composition and spending profile of the development in order that planning and design requirements can be met, and also to agree the use of one-for-one receipts, and obviously also grant, should that be appropriate. This site then, as a bit of background, was identified through our area housing team as a parking site on an existing estate where we don't receive any revenue and it doesn't provide a vital resource to our local community or to our housing in that area. We've therefore worked up a feasibility study for the site to look at its potential, and it's come back that it's most suitable for a flatted development. The demand and makeup of this site has been decided through looking at the information on the housing register and looking at where demand is most needed for those sites, as well as which myself and Alison work with our colleagues in Havant to discuss how sites will be allocated between us. And in this particular situation, Havant have a household that has a very significant need for a ground floor disabled access unit. This is for a full-time wheelchair user, and we're looking to incorporate that within this development. These homes will also, as are our other developments, built to a high quality and will seek to be as energy efficient as possible, delivering the lowest practical impact on carbon and nitrogen dioxide emissions, and continue to show us as a leader in that market.
Thank you for that. Joe, CLG and Housing Consortium colleagues, any thoughts? If you don't have any, that's also fine.
Well, I have thought about helping these people, the homelessness, because I'm also a mother. I have a child like of their age. My eldest is 52. So I put them all in a nice place. Even if I'm far away, I'm not worrying. That's how I care also for these people who are homeless. I want to help them, only I'm not rich. I cannot make magic. It's also the idea I can help and supervise, because when I was working in the Citizens Advice Bureau, I've learned how to speak to those people who needed help. So I understand also some of your ways here in England.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for that passion. I may return to that towards the end, if I may. Maria?
Thank you, Chair. Section 1.2. Just simply to say that I'm very much reassured to know that there's going to be some building going on, and I'm also happy about the fact that we can work with Havant Borough Council. That's good. And 4.4, simply that unlike private developers who squirm their way out of putting in social housing that should be going to our people as well, we're not afraid to give Havant 3 of our properties. I'm happy about that.
Thank you, Maria. You look mildly pleased as well, which is always a pleasurable thing. Scott?
Thank you, Darren. Just going on to 2.1, it's probably actually not a question for you, Joe, it's more of a question for Wayne, actually, sat there. He thought he was going to get away with it today.
No, he's not.
He's not. He knows he's not. He's smiling. It's just that 2.1 says 1.9 million capital expenditure. Obviously, some of that is going to be funded by borrowing, Wayne. How much is funded by borrowing?
It depends. So what we've done is we've financially appraised it in 2 ways. So the first way is by using one-for-one receipts, which we can fund up to 30% through using one-for-one receipts. So 70% of it will be funded from debt, or we can apply for affordable homes grant around about £20,000 per unit.
That's £200,000.
That's right. So 1.7 million will be used for borrowing.
Okay. Sorry, Wayne. Bear with me.
It's okay, it's got his calculator out.
Don't need a calculator down when you've got a brain. Alright. Okay.
Be told, isn't it?
Sorry. I do it sometimes and don't realise I'm doing it.
No, you don't.
I'm glad you're used to me by now.
Well, it wasn't like this in rehearsals, I tell you.
No, it wasn't. Well, I was on time. For a start, okay. So what model are you going for?
What do you mean?
Because I've written down about the grant funding on 2.3. So if we don't get the grant funding, basically you're going to go for the other model. I'm assuming, just looking at...
Yeah, so there's only a finite amount of one-for-one receipts. So if we can deliver the project and we can get external funding and we can use our one-for-one receipts on other projects, then we'll try and apply for that. So it's just basically keeping our options open.
Yeah, okay. I have no issue with the build. I think it's a great actual build. It's really, really sensible. And it's great that obviously we're using our partnership in Havant. It's perfect. It just comes down to the grant. Obviously, I just want to know how we're going to pay for it and which way around. So I don't know if this is a question for you, James, but have you identified how far are we along the lines of getting that financial grant over the line?
Sorry. So the problem we have is that the current guidance says we can either use one-for-one receipts or we can fund it from a grant. We can't use a mixture of the two.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying you said you're going for the grant first. So I'm asking how far along. Sorry, I'm asking how far along we are for the grant.
Do you want to answer that?
Because obviously, if you're doing that first, I imagine that's what you're down that line already.
So,
I should have asked this earlier. I'm really sorry.
yes. Until the budget announcement, which won't be until the 11th,
Yes,
we cannot
right.
apply for any grant funding because Homes England's funding is currently static and left as it is. So once I know after the budget what grant funding I can apply for, then I can apply for grant funding to support this scheme. At that point, if we're successful, then Wayne will redo the financial appraisal and it will be with funding.
Brilliant.
And
That's fine. That's all. It's just that I'd rather know what we're doing. So as soon as we know, can someone please tell me?
Well, if you could ask the Chancellor, I think that'd be huge.
No. I mean, as soon as you would know, like as soon as the ability to bid is going in.
I believe always in openness and transparency. So yes, I'm sure.
No, I'm glad someone in the administration does.
All of us.
But I'll leave you with that, Darren. But yeah, that's fine. Thank you for that. It's a really good scheme, really sensible, and I'm glad to see that we've got a high priority case that we're building home for, which I think is the most important aspect of this project.
Yes. Thank you for that. Well, at least some of that. Scott, Cal.
Just to clarify firstly, in terms of the right to buy receipts, how much do we retain? Do we retain it all, or is it a percentage of what is sold?
Yeah, so provided we reinvest it back into the housing, then yeah, we retain it. But we've got to spend it within a certain amount of time.
Okay. So we brought in 4.2 million last year in right to buy receipts, so that's a fair bit to be working with. Okay. In terms of my main question around this is around the green and environmental standards for the homes.
Yep.
So 4.6 obviously touches on this, and it says that the homes were built to a high quality goods and seek to make them as energy efficient as possible, delivering the lowest practical impact on carbon and nitrogen dioxide emissions. I was just wondering if we had any more, if that had been fleshed out, what kind of standards and what kind of tools are we going to be using to make sure that they're kind of as green as they possibly could be?
Meredith, please put your microphone on.
Apologies. Sorry. We'll be working on the knowledge that we'll gain on the Doyle Avenue site councillor, and also the other work that we're doing around solar panels, air source heat pumps. So we'll use a myriad of the experience that we've gained to date in terms of developing this project further.
I mean, because presumably that has implications for the financial model. We've got a build cost of 1.9 million. Presumably that 1.9 million delivers homes at a certain environmental standard, and you could spend either more or less in order to make them greener or less green. So what is the current environmental standards that we've financially modelled it on?
So we've used the same modelling that we've got for the costings that we've done on the other development, so it's set like that. But the other thing to factor into this is we've also got a high cost disabled unit, so that's also got an impact on the modelling, and it always does in terms of what it costs to build that unit out versus other units.
Just to kind of finish on this point, and I guess this is more of a general point about how the integrated impact assessments are being used. Section B, environment and climate change, the explanation to the question, please expand on your impact your policy proposal will have, how would you propose to mitigate any negative impacts? It's kind of one line, PCC will endeavour to deliver more energy efficient properties, which is great, but I would suspect that the intention of that is to have a detailed answer.
I was also concerned about the poor spelling in it as well, because somebody couldn't spell endeavour properly. But I think if we're endeavouring to do something, then we also need to make sure have we got any ideas? Sorry, Maureen, I try and avoid interrupting my Conservative and Labour colleagues. Have we got any performance certificate standards that we're looking at, what they call energy performance certificates that we're looking at the moment on here? I mean, I know with some social housing builds not done by this authority, some have been shocking in terms of their energy efficiency. But have we got any ideas about energy performance certificates or anything like that?
So once we get to a stage of detailed design, I'll be very, very happy to come back and talk to you about exactly what those standards are. The problem is when you're setting a capital budget, you need to do that in order to move into the next design stage. So what we're doing here is we're outlining what the likely costs are, and we're moving forward through the process. So I can't tell you exactly what the standards will be for this development. As we go into detailed design, we can, and we can feed that information back into briefings. But at this point right now, I can't tell you exactly what it would be, or how it will stack up, or what level of energy certification it would get to.
Scott, you had Cal.
Yeah, but I mean, just to, I guess, conclude on that point, and isn't necessarily specific to this report, I think it's a more general point, and that if we're going to have these integrated impact assessments, then in order to be worth the paper they're printed on and all the paper that's used printing them, I think they need to be more detailed and kind of more concrete in terms of the actions we're actually going to be taking to reduce carbon emissions and make these developments as green as possible.
I think sorry, Joe, you wanted to come back on that.
One of the things we could do with it is to do exactly what we do with the financial appraisal. So as we move through the process, we update the information to make sure that, one, we're staying financially viable, but absolutely, as you say, as we move through that detailed process, we can update that and make sure that we're staying where we should and use the document to evidence that.
Scott, you had another point.
Just quite a point that Meredith said about the Doyle Avenue development, and it sounds like potentially using it as a guinea pig to see what goes wrong and what works. Just the fact that the way it's just might be the way you said it. We're going to see how that one goes, and then we factor into this one. It's pretty much along those lines. Can you just explain that?
Sorry.
It's just the way you said it, Meredith. I mean, I picked up on the point you said we're using the same for Doyle Avenue.
Yes.
And then when we go into this project, we're going to see how that one works, sort of the costings and.
This is to do with the costings of the work.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. So obviously, are we going into the Doyle one a bit blind on costings, or is it this one we're not too sure about the costings?
No, the consultants working on the Doyle Avenue have worked out various cost plans and cost estimates based on the specification that they've developed. The project in front of you has got a very brief specification at the moment because it's based on a square meterage against the plan layout for the site.
Okay, it's just I asked that question because obviously with the way global supply chain is at the moment and trying to source products all over the world, and you can't get them because 80% of the products come from a place which is quarantined, it just worries me that potentially we could be looking at costs rising rather than going down.
Possibly, but that'll be reflected in the risk analysis that we'll do as we put the estimates together.
It's more to the point that I raised that because a project that we spoke about 6 months ago is now probably going to go towards planning very shortly. We have probably build starting as soon as that's done, and we have a global supply chain which is in all over the world, which is in ruins potentially. So that build, effectively the one that you mentioned, Doyle Avenue, could actually go up. Potentially. I'm putting a potential feasibility out there because you obviously I wasn't going to talk about it, you mentioned it, and it just really made my a bit of a light bulb moment on my brain.
It's a valid point.
Yeah. I know that if that does happen, can myself and Councillor Corkery be kept up to date on the costings of those projects?
Well, can I be kept up to date as well, please?
I'd like to think so.
That's
But that's, sorry, that was me picking a point. If you mentioned it, I wouldn't have even thought about it until global supply chain is killing me at the moment.
Wayne, as our finance bod.
I think the problem we have is it's procedural. So we need to come up with an estimated budget for anything that we build in order to be able to change the capital programme so we can actually spend. So when we come here, we'll have an outlined budget. If something happened where the amount that we've got approved within the capital budget isn't enough, we've got to come back to this committee and request further funds. So, but we've got to be able to progress with any project. And what we do is we use, good intelligence from projects we've worked on before, anything specific that we know at the time. So, and also within that budget we'll include some form of contingency, but we obviously can't factor in every possibility. But there are certain gateways that will effectively, once you've gone through the procurement process, if it is vastly more than what we've got approved, we'll be coming back to this committee in order to make the report.
No, it's fine. I know that obviously underspends and overspends commonly will go through governance and audit as well. So the information is publicly available if you want to go and find it. But as you know, anyone that's been on governance, audit and standards, the papers are probably about 900 pages long. So good luck.
Anything else, Scott? Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I agree. One of the things people don't know is that we, this council, owns 5,000 homes in Havant. And I think it's the biggest social housing provider in the borough of Havant, or the biggest landowner in the borough of Havant, or both. And we also have to look after everyone, not just people who live within our city boundaries. And this seems a very good idea. I think it's right that we learn the lessons of all previous developments. The one at Doyle Avenue that Scott and Meredith have mentioned is the first one that we've done since all councils put ourselves into a climate emergency. And so that's something that we've got to learn continually on. I've also offered up some suggestions from a development in my ward called Copner Green, which is an eco-development that's run by social housing as well, both good and bad bits on that. So we've got to learn all the time, and I think there's no harm in learning. Our starting point as an administration is as many homes, please, at socially rented levels as possible, and as green as possible, sounds really great, and then you have to implement it. But I'm also conscious about the needs that haven't have as well, and that also helps us in terms of our trying to deliver the number of homes we have too. So like the others, I'm delighted that we're able to work with Havant, and I'm delighted that we're working together on a shared and joint project that meets everybody's needs. Plus it gets people off the waiting list, which helps deal with the homelessness issues that you raised earlier on. So that to me sounds great, and I'm happy to take that forward. So thank you very much, colleagues. Right, we move to the third and the final item on this agenda, which is the Council House Maintenance and Improvements and Housing IT Business Software Programme, otherwise known as the Major Projects Programme. So all the big stuff. James, you're down to do this. Who's going to do Meredith? Fire away.
Okay, thank you, Darren. The report in front of you is the annual report that we bring to Housing Cabinet, and it presents to residents and members the detail behind our spending plans for the next 12 months around the revenue and capital expenditure on council house maintenance, together with the IT expenditure for software and hardware within the HRA. We seek approval to incur the expenditure in respect of the capital projects and also the rolling programmes that are included in there. The actual high-level finances were approved through the revisions of the HIP at the full council on the 11th of February, and the actual maintenance budgets, the high-level budgets, were approved at your last decision meeting at the end of January. Within the report, there are a number of appendices. The first appendix is the high-level revenue expenditure, which shows the various budget lines against the revenue expenditure for next year. Appendix B it forms two parts. It's the capital expenditure, again the detailed lines of capital expenditure, plus then the financial global appraisal for my colleague Wayne Layton for the approvals to proceed with the schemes. We've got then Appendix C, which is the detail and explanation behind the hardware and software expenditure. And then on Appendix D, we've got what we call our budget plan, and this distills down then the high-level lines of expenditure of both capital and revenue to give indication on the geographical areas where we'll be working next year, and also the types of work that will be undertaken, whether it be fire risk assessment work, whether it be mechanical and electrical upgrades, whether it be external decorations, etc. So it gives the it gives both residents and councillors our explanation on where we'll be spending our money going forward for next year. I think the document then also gives us the flexibility in future years then to adjust resources in terms of any upcoming changes in legislation and other upcoming unknown maintenance issues.
Thank you for that, Meredith. Consortium colleagues, any thoughts? You could say no, don't worry. Could you please switch your microphone on? That was very kind of you. Thank you.
It's just how to run it. It really needs like our accountants. We have to know our ledger book, which the debit and credit will be balanced, and there is no, if it is no balance there and no profit, so it's not working. So everything we'll do is to plan all the economy, to make the economics, so that you know which are the expenditures and how many budget you have, and to run it, how much to the rents and people who will help or voluntary like that. About this homelessness I was talking about, sir.
Right. Thank you very much.
Well, that is because of this accounting that I have a bit of knowledge. So it all talks about you just don't plan and without thinking about the expenditures also and the money coming in.
Yes, I've seen many a newspaper article which shows zero understanding of housing finance, saying things can be funded from the council tax, which I thought was mildly interesting. So I think that's a fair point, and it's about how to make sure that projects stay within budget and how we can deliver as much value for money as possible, and certainly they can run ideally to time and to budget, which are two important things. So that's very kind of you. Thank you. Maria, did you have anything else, my love?
Yes. Just two items. They're actually repeated a few times. So I'm just going to refer to page 35. Right at the top, you've got asbestos removal. This has come up year after year after year. I'm just wondering how much more asbestos is there, or do you know how much to remove? Because how many more years is it going to go on for?
Obviously, our buildings were built predominantly in the 50s and 60s, when obviously there was a lot of asbestos used in building products. So, most of our buildings were built in that period, so most of our buildings will contain asbestos in some areas. And this funding is continually to, as we come across, asbestos is safe, as we've always sort of said, as long as it's in good condition and it's left untouched. But this is related to whenever we do repair work in some of those buildings, if we identify any areas where asbestos needs to be removed, then we will remove that asbestos as part of doing the repair work that we're doing in terms of maintaining our assets.
So you don't actually know that you've got another 5,000 houses to sort out all?
The money that's in there, no, it's because in some areas the asbestos will remain in those buildings probably for the life of that building, and it's only really economic to remove that asbestos when you're doing it as part of any other work, or if there is an issue with any of the areas that we identify. So it's an ongoing, and you will always see it every year probably within this budget.
My other point was we're retrofitting sprinklers to Ladywood and Handsworth House. Do you know when that's starting and how long that would take place?
In terms of the sprinkler programme, that will commence this coming financial year. We've been working on that scheme for the last few, in this current financial year in terms of preparing the scheme. That is the first 2 blocks that we're going to be retrofitting. So there has been a lot of design element in terms of getting that off of the ground. But when we do the scheme, it will be a framework contract that will enable us to do our other blocks as part of a programme, and we will be able to follow that on in future years. And what we've got with our sprinkler programme is it's priority based. So what we've done is we've done an assessment of the blocks with the highest need, and then we will work through those blocks in that priority order. So the highest priority blocks for us is Ladywood and Handsworth. There are 2 tallest blocks, and they have a single escape staircase, so they are our top priority. And then once we do those blocks, we will move on to the next priority blocks.
Do you have any idea then how long the works will actually take in each block at all?
At this stage, I haven't got an exact programme, so it's a little bit like when Joe was talking about their work. So we are building that up, and obviously we will keep residents informed. The plan is when we're at the stage at the moment where I think we're about to go out to tender to get on board the contractors, and the intention will be is that when we do the scheme, we will have a pilot property that we will test out to find out how long it takes to take in each individual property and where the pipe runs will be, and then we will start to engage with the residents in those blocks so they can see what the sprinkler system is actually going to look like, and we will be more informed to be able to develop a programme that says exactly how long we're going to take to do each of the blocks.
Thank you, Maria. Cal?
Thank you. So now I've had a chance to study the kind of detail a bit more. I've got a couple of kind of specific questions, which I appreciate you may or may not be able to answer the details of. The first one is around Ash Road in Westlea, window replacement. So it's proposed that 1.5 million is allocated this coming financial year, followed by another 700,000 the following financial year. I know it's described as window replacement, but do you know any more about the specifics of what that relates to and the need for it?
Yes, I think that follows. There's a number of blocks in the Westlea area that are very similar blocks, and that is about. Initially, that was linked to doing the window replacement, but it becomes more complex than just doing the window replacement. There's tile hanging as well that needs replacement, and also I think when they did the overall evaluation, there's issues with the roof. So it's becoming quite a big scheme. And I can't remember offhand, but I can certainly give you the details. But there was one of the blocks we've already done, and then this is a programme really of doing the other blocks in that Westlea area that are very similar and have got the same sort of issues. But I can come back to you outside of the meeting in terms of the exact detail of the work, if that's helpful.
Thank you, yeah, that would be helpful. Just following in that vein, the Edgbaston and Tipton electrical heating upgrades. Again, if we just know a little bit more information about that.
Yeah, so, Tipton and Edgbaston have got electrical heating in the block at the moment. It's a combination of underfloor electric mats and night storage heaters, and the sum of money in there is the exploration of feasibility work around what's the most appropriate then heating to go back in there. So we've done some high-level feasibilities in terms of whether we continue with whole-scale electric heating in there, or looking at perhaps a wider-scale district heating system with CHP. So that work is being developed at the moment, and we'll have a better idea perhaps later in the summer of which route we're going to go down in terms of the actual route, in terms of the type of heating that we'll install in there.
But sorry, did you say that the money that's been allocated is just for the feasibility, or if we
No,
allocate money for the works?
We've done some high level feasibilities over either electric or district heating. So that's what the money's for. But we've got some more work to determine which of those two choices we want to take. So the actual monies that you see in the budget book are for the total works, including feasibility, design, etc.
And just to follow on to another kind of specific example, one that I probably know the most about, the Courts Estate in Lamport, so Lord's Court, Crown Court, Wimpole and King Albert. This is probably the one area that I've received kind of the most contact from with regards to residents, with regards to the kind of general upkeep of the estate. I think anyone that's walked around it probably wouldn't disagree with that. You know, I think just to look at it initially, it seems quite clear to me that it's a estate that's seen a lack of investment over many years. Pretty much every single balcony you walk along, the paint is flaking off, hasn't been repainted for quite some time, and is in quite urgent needs of some serious investment. So I'm glad to see that there is some money being allocated for that. I do think there's probably a kind of longer term project there to look at the kind of more significant works that need to be done in order to bring that estate up to a decent standard. And similarly, I mean, it's an issue, I think, with a lot of the blocks, like was mentioned, blocks that are built in the 50s or 60s are probably inevitably going to be now seeing signs of wear and tear. I know it was mentioned in a previous meeting, the impacts of the Rent Reduction Act, and that's probably, I would imagine, impacted on our ability to invest and maintain those estates to a decent standard. Similarly, the kind of Australia blocks in Lamport, similar kind of issues. I went in one recently, walked around with a surveyor, and there'd been a leak from one of the kind of skylights. That was being repaired, kind of brought up to a decent standard as a repair, the actual leak, but the damage caused by a leak was then going to have to be put onto a planned maintenance programme for some point in the future, and obviously it's unclear at what point that may be arrived at. So I appreciate a lot is being done with regards to kind of maintenance and ensuring estates are kept to a decent standard, but I think that's something we need to keep pushing and ensure that those budgets are maximised going forward, so that everyone can live in a decent standard.
I'll come back to your first point at the end, but I think on your second point, that's fair. We've lost £12 million as a result of government policy. That's a shame, but there we are. And it will have an impact, and you can't. It's pointless dressing it up, which politicians often do, because it's true. What the impact is impacts on people's daily lives, but it's one of the things we have to live with and try and mitigate as far as we can. So personally, I agree with you, but such is life. Anything else, Cal? No. Okay, Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to be quite brief about this. I'm just going to go to a subject that I do know a bit about, which is on page 44. Probably a question for you, Steve, about new heating installations. On our boilers that we install, what's our ERP rating? What's our ERP rating?
Sorry, Scott.
On our new heating installations, we've got £2 million put aside for it.
Yeah.
So what is the ERP rating for the energy efficiency? Because I'm just moving on from the climate of what Councillor Corker was talking about earlier.
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you, but I can come back to you on that one.
Please do. It's just, I find it quite interesting. It's a product directive and it needs to be about 92% of what it should be. But I ask that question because obviously we have got so many properties, so many gas boilers that we're putting into them, and yet we're trying to be energy efficient. Yeah, I appreciate the fact that new homes can't have those because that's the directive that's been coming out from the government. But obviously when we're replacing, we want to get the most energy efficient product possible. And it just interests me that what we're using and what we're spending on them. Because obviously with the regulations as they are, as they changed in 2018, you need to have a thermostat or a timer with that to create an energy efficiency rating. Basically, that's what, God bless the European Union, wanted us to do. So I just asked the question because we've got 2 million aside for it, and then it goes up to 3 million as you move on along the budget, and then it goes up to 3.2 million. So I just want to know why. Is that because of that regulation change, or is it because of potential energy efficiency as we're moving along the lines, or is it a mixture of things?
It's a mixture of various factors. We started installing gas central heating boilers at the late 1990s, early 2000s. We had massive programmes of investment in our properties, and we were installing in excess of 1,000 boilers a year. And what you're seeing there is as those boilers then become time expired and need to be replaced, we're forward planning in terms of those works going forward.
Okay,
so that's what you see there.
That's perfect sense. It rises, and I can see why it rises now, because obviously you have the additional legislation. It means you have to buy basically more products, which is great for the installer, but not great for the person that's paying for it. Which is true. Yeah. It's not. And then I was going to talk about asbestos removal, and it's a point that Maria actually made that made me think about. Is it because once asbestos is disturbed, then it has to be removed? Once it's dormant and laying there, it's not causing a problem? Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, when you get asbestos in various locations, some of them are accessible, some of them not accessible, and essentially asbestos is completely safe all the time. It's in good condition, so therefore there's no need to take it out just for the sake of taking it out. But the budgets that we got in there for asbestos removal are either where we've identified that it is damaged and does need to be removed, but invariably it's linked to when we're doing other works. So for instance, if we do a new kitchen and it's got the existing tiles in there, they may contain asbestos, and that would then need to be removed. Or if we're doing work behind a ducting that needs to be removed, again that would be asbestos removal. Similarly, they're very low levels, but there might be any Artex pre-1999 would contain very low levels of asbestos in it. So again, if we're doing any works to ceilings or whatever, there will be occasions where we have to remove that in controlled conditions, and then that's where that cost is coming in.
Okay, it's just that I asked, Maria brought it up, and it actually just focused the mind a bit, because I remember when I used to work on a building site probably about 10-15 years ago now, and we had to leave site because half the site, as we was doing a retrofit job, half the site was covered in asbestos, so they had to get a team in specially to remove it, because obviously we weren't capable. It just focused the mind. Obviously that £2 million that's put aside, how much of that is roughly spent? Is all of it spent, or is there sometimes an underspend on that?
That figure of asbestos is pretty much it's based on our typical expenditure that we've had in previous years. So it's not we're not planning to do big removal schemes as such. It's more of a reactive as we're doing the work that we're doing. So it's based on our knowledge of what we've been spending on previous years.
That's fantastic. There's one more thing, if I can find it. So I was going to quite look forward to that. I found it now. Yeah, page 67, lift refurbishments. I've just, basically it's a bit of ward work for myself, to be honest, and I just want to plug it. The Ridings and Esquire closed. It was, the lifts were damaged early, I think I want to say back in August or September time. And I think you remember it actually, Meredith, you actually emailed me about this. They've been an action, and basically there were progress to get these lifts refurbished, and I'm grateful to see that it's actually in there. So I want to just say thank you on behalf of the residents that I represent, because it's very important for them to have those. They were out of action for 48 hours, and I think it's very important.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thank you for that, Scott. Right, I have a couple of questions as well on a few of the aspects here. Energy efficiency schemes. What sort of things are we talking about?
Okay, this is continuing the work that the energy team are providing across the HRA stock, Councillor Sanders. So this will include work erecting and installing solar PV. We've got a programme at the moment of installing battery storage around our solar PV. We've installed about a dozen batteries to date, and we've got a programme about another 25 in next year, and there's also then some work that we're doing around installing combined heat and power. So I mentioned earlier on about the feasibility of looking at Tipton Edgbaston. We're also looking at the next stage of the works around the Charles Dickens engines up at the top end of town, where those engines are now approaching the end of their life, 20 years, and so we'll be changing those for more efficient combined heat and power engines.
You meant Charles Dickens engines is a new concept to me.
Yeah. So
where is it?
So on the Charles Dickens estate, around Pickwick and Copperfield
Oh,
houses.
there, right, okay, that's fine.
We've
Okay.
got a district heating system, so there's about approximately 600 properties across the estate. We installed it in the early 2000s, a very effective way of heating the properties, and we're looking then to replace the engines, the heating engines in those blocks in the next couple of years.
Okay, that's very good news, and if it can be expanded, that would be hugely, hugely helpful. And you've also got £500,000 for environmental improvements as well. Again, what sort of things does that include?
Okay, these are improvements around our blocks and properties on the island. We work closely with our colleagues in the clean and green section to make sure that the blocks, the appearance of the blocks, but also to reduce the amount of undesirable maintenance that we have to do on historic and perhaps overgrown environmental schemes. So a lot of the work is tidying up areas, it's improving the layout of areas, making the areas better in appearance.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that, Meredith. Right, well, I'm happy to approve this budget. I think a few things stand out for me. The first is the next round of money for sprinklers. That's something the Fire Brigades Union has been banging on about for years, and they're right. And I'm delighted that we're prioritising the blocks that need it the most, the blocks with the single entrances and the tallest ones first, and then working through that list. And I think that's very good forward planning. None of us really know what's going to emerge from the Grenfell inquiry, but it's absolutely important that we're taking proactive work on that, so that's very good. Cal doesn't know this, but officers will. The courts has been a priority for me for a couple of years on the grounds of some of the masonry's rubbish, and you're right about the paint and everything else, so I'm finally delighted that we're able to spend some cash in there, because I think that is long, long overdue. As you know, the internals are lovely and the flats are nice. It's just they need a good, positive environment in there. And I note your offer of assistance with regards to the future as being very helpful, because I think we have to take people with us. It is a block that has been up there for a long time. You probably wouldn't have designed it now, but we do need to make sure we have a proper way forwards for the people who are living there, and I'm delighted that that priority has been put forwards. I would also have a plug for the Eastern Road screens as well. I'm delighted to see those windows being changed, because Her Majesty's Crittall is not exactly the greatest thing you see when you're in a traffic jam on the Eastern Road. And I'm also pleased around things like energy efficiency schemes, street lights on housing land, that sort of stuff, which is showing a commitment to our green agenda and responding to the climate emergency. We need to make sure that's aligned with the wider energy and water at home work that we're doing in the private sector. I think it's pretty bad if we're going to tell a whole bunch of private landlords they've got to do up their places and we don't. So I'm glad that we are, and I hope there'll be some alignment on that. So on that basis, I'm delighted to approve that budget. And with that, that closes the formal part of the meeting. So I'm grateful. I have that, Joe, at closing it at 5:42. There is a second stage to this meeting, which people watching live or on demand will see in a couple of weeks' time. But for CLG colleagues and Fiona from the news, thank you very much for coming.